lots and lots of malicious behavior going on, right? 75% of all the hacks, all the breaks that we've seen, be it Sony or Home Depot, some of the other ones are from exploited credentials, right? Something as simple as a password. We see lots of unsanctioned IT. We call this shadow IT going on, right? People going out and signing up for a SaaS services, a cloud service, without actually getting it sanctioned by IT. How do we stop these sort of things? And when we look at mobile security itself, right, we actually had a poll question here at the beginning about how many people had rolled an MDM, specifically mobile device management product. The reality is when we look at all the customers out there, it's a very low number. It's only about 15%. And when you look at the 15% that have some sort of mobile security platform in place, a very small number of their people and devices are actually covered by that mobile security product, or that mobile security product really isn't doing, much more than some very basic things. So these are the realities of life, right? And so when we look at all the things that a user touches throughout the day, and that's not just your users, right? But it's both your users, it's your employees, it's even your customers. They're touching a lot of things on a lot of different devices. Mute the. There we go. They're touching a lot of different devices, and devices are moving along, devices are getting lost, data is being leaked, sometimes intentionally, right? Sharing something with a business partner, for example. But what happens once they have that data? All the different pieces, and it does boil down to identity, and that's what we think is going on here, and where we have to have a what we call a control plane. And so at Microsoft we say identity is the new control plane, because it's not good enough to put a firewall around your organization and consider yourself safe anymore. Because of all the sharing that's going on, because of the mobility of your users, you have to look at security in a brand new light. So we think of security as broken up into users, devices, apps, and data, implementing security at each level. And then even with a different bent, again, it's great to think about it in terms of just your employees, but until you break this down into looking at how business partners access my data, how they access my applications, how customers get access to data or apps that they may be able to get access to, you're missing something, right? So again, that firewall still needs to be there, right? You still need to protect those assets in your data center, but data and applications are moving outside of the corporate confines. So we need to give those users access from everywhere to everything that they should have access to, right? We want it based on controls. We want to manage and secure the productivity, right? When we think of what a user does day in, day out, the bulk of that is wrapped around what we at Microsoft call productivity apps, right? We think of this primarily as the Office suite, but there's some extensions to that as well as we move into SaaS properties, software as a service. But we need to be able to lock those down, and then we need to integrate with what you have today, right? It's one thing to walk in and say, hey, here's this brand new shiny cloud solution, there's no data in it, but the reality is that you have apps and data in your organization that we need to integrate with today. And at Microsoft, we're dedicated to that vision of what we call hybrid, right? Things in the cloud, things in your on-premise data center, and working interchangeably between the two. So when we think about Enterprise Mobility Solution, EMS, and what it is all up, it's all about securing users, the devices, apps, and data, right? So it's the identity, devices, apps, and data. And identity is that key plane where everything starts, because again, when you look at that 75% of data breaches, those data breaches mean something to a company, right? When you look at the numbers out there, the average remediation cost once a hacker's gotten in your environment is about $3.5 million. Now that's just the remediation cost. That's what it's going to cost to figure out that they're there, get them out, fix any short-term holes that you have. But the reality is that doesn't affect your brand. There's no value for the hit that your brand took because you had a breach, or the actual data that was stolen, right? Maybe it was proprietary data that you don't want to get out. So that number is much, much larger. In fact, $500 billion is the average for cybercrime when we look at this from an industry-wide perspective. $500 billion in impact. And the average number of days that a user is in your environment before they're found is about 200. We've changed over the years, right? We've gone from the days of script kiddies going out and maybe hacking a website just to be malicious and putting up something funny or mean. We've moved into organized crime with cryptoware and all the other pieces, and now we've moved into nation states and countries hacking other countries and companies. And these folks are very, very well educated. They're very patient, and they're equipped with some of the best tools out there. So we have to develop tools and resources on our side to protect ourselves. And again, that's what Enterprise Mobility Suite's all about. And it does wrap all around productivity, right? We think that the basis of everything is around those productivity apps. So how do we keep those secure, keep the data secure, control what the users can do with that data, but still keep it accessible to them so that they can do their day-in, day jobs. And we want to do so, again, with that identity-driven security model that we're going to dig into here. We want to do so on their devices by managing the mobile device, whether it be a laptop or a tablet or a mobile phone or even a desktop. And we want to do it in a comprehensive solution, right? So we're going to talk about a lot of things that are Enterprise Mobility Suite, but what I want you to take away right now is that it's not just one thing. We're not just talking about mobile device management. We're talking about a lot of different pieces. So let's kind of dig in. So we'll start with identity-driven security, and this really is the linchpin of the security model. Now, we already mentioned that 75% of the exploits are because of the credentials, right? This is for a lot of different reasons. One, there are a lot of properties that your users have to log into on a day-in, day-out basis. Now, a lot of these are going to be controlled by Active Directory, right? They're going to be, Microsoft kind of applications pulled in Active Directory, and your users probably got some indication of how to go change their password and all that kind of good stuff. But now you've got all these SaaS properties, software as a service properties out there, and this could be, Box, it could be Concur for travel or SAP or a lot of different pieces, Salesforce.com, that are out there. Of course, Microsoft has a ton of platforms in there as well. So what you don't want to do is have separate identities, right? AD being one identity, those cloud plays being another identity. Because what happens? The reality is that users either use the same password everywhere, and if they're separate stacks, this is bad. If one of those gets hacked, that credential gets figured out, they can go anywhere else and log in with that same password. That doesn't work very well. It could be that you have lots of on-premises assets that are not in the AD stack, right? And the same rules apply. Or maybe you've implemented some security rules that say, hey, you have to have a complex password or whatever. But now that user, because it's a complex password in a whole bunch of different ones, they either use the same one as we just discussed, or maybe they're good and they have separate ones for all those properties, but now they got to write them down or use some sort of password manager or something. So this is a problem. So what we've done is we've extended Active Directory into the cloud, into Azure Active Directory, and we've provided a bunch of services so that you can have one identity for all your assets. So whether it's a SaaS play or whether it's an on-premises asset, you can log into it that same username and same password, and we can enforce rules on that, so that we can say, hey, you have to have a complex password, you have to change it every 2 months or 45 days or whatever your rule is. But we can amp up and make it even more protected by doing things like multi-factor authentication, right? So when you look at this, it's a single common identity across all your cloud services and your on-premises services that we can base all of our identity solutions on. Now, again, I said we got to make that more secure. So we want to do things like dynamic groups and automatic provisioning. We want to do single sign-on to all those cloud properties, right? We don't want users having to go enter their password in other properties. We do this with an IDP. It's part of Azure Active Directory Premium, and we currently federate with over 2,600 other SaaS apps. So if you go out there, all the common apps, again, I mentioned a bunch of them to begin with, but Salesforce and Google Apps and AWS, there's a whole bunch of them out there, not just Microsoft properties that we're already working with. And it's as easy as going in and saying, I want this SaaS app for my corporation. I'm going to give these users, because of their group, access to it, and that way you have a common framework for everybody to go log into. You have a group portal that they could go into, so they log into myapps.microsoft.com and they see all the applications, all the web applications that they have access to, again, based on those group memberships. B2B collaboration is something that's out there. It's a little bit of a separate topic today, so I'll just touch on it here, but there's a B2B and a B2C component. The B2B component is free, so the idea here is that with Azure Active Directory B2B, for other people that also are in Azure Active Directory, or you have them sign up for a stub service, you can give access to external vendors, to internal resources, without having to put them in your Active Directory and manage them and all that kind of stuff. And then B2C, if you're actually, I'll just touch on that briefly, if you're actually doing business to consumer type applications, you've got your own iOS or Android or Windows Phone app, and you're giving users, you don't want to manage those identities. So we actually have a product called Azure Active Directory B2C that we'd be happy to talk to you about, that makes that very easy. It does all the management of the user identities for you. Now, I touched on a couple self-service capabilities with the group membership, the My Apps portal, but one of the big ones is self-service password reset. So when we go around and we talk to customers, one of the number one things that we find is the help desk call, right? It's the number one help desk call out there. It's, hey, I've forgotten my password, I can't get in. How do we manage that? Well, I was talking to one customer not too terribly long ago, and this is a medium-sized customer, okay? He's about 5,000 employees. They were doing over 20,000 password resets a year. He has a very nomadic workforce, and this was happening a lot because he had lots of different identities. So we were able to tie all his identities together, give him a self-service password reset portal that users can go into. It does some challenge response, maybe hits them with multi-factor authentication, and let them reset their own password. That user, that one specific user, he figured he was saving somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 a year just by rolling out self-service password reset. That's part of the Enterprise Mobility Suite. So when we do that, I talked about multi-factor already. So this is typical multi-factor, right? So this is being able to get an SMS text message or even a phone call to a phone for that user to prove, yep, that's who I am. It's being able to use an app on a smartphone to be able to just say, yep, allow or deny, or maybe it's a challenge and you got to enter your one-time PIN because the app's updating it. But the idea here is that we can go in and very finely grained look at where your users are coming from and hit them with these different levels of security based on the situation at the time. And we call this conditional access. And we'll come back and talk about that more deeply here in a minute. One of the other things that Microsoft provides in the Azure Active Directory Premium service as part of EMS is leaked credential reporting. So we have a large cybersecurity team. One of the things that team does is constantly scours the darknet for stolen credentials. And when we see one of our Azure Active Directory Premium customers and somebody's information's for sale up in the darknet or whatever, we'll report it back to you and let you know what's going on. We do this and some other things based on Azure machine learning. So our Azure services are, of course, all our cloud services. And this is everything from, infrastructure as a service, right, running a virtual machine in the Microsoft server farms, all the way to software as a service, where Office 365 and most of EMS runs. But part of that is a machine learning portion. So we are doing things like creating security reports off of these machine learning. So one of the favorite reports I like to point out, I like to call the impossible travel report. So it's actually looking at where your users are logging in from and time stamping them and saying, hey, Chris is logging in from Atlanta, Georgia at 10:22 a.m. And then in 15, 20 minutes, an hour, we see Chris try to log in from California or Asia or the Middle East. We'll flag that and say, hey, literally can't get from point A to point B. What do we want to do about that? Do we want to hit that new request with multi-factor so that we prove it? Because maybe it's a valid request, right? Maybe I'm going through some weird gateway to get back to something and it's routing me through somewhere strange. It may be a valid request. So we want to be able to allow the user in, but we want to do so with a little more scrutiny on that, right? Hit them with multi-factor, or maybe we just want to report it back to IT or security so that they can pick up the phone and say, hey, what's going on? We may have a breach or we may need to change your password. So we're watching what the user's doing. Again, I talked about conditional access, and this is about guarding not only the apps, but more critically, the back-end data. And we're going to talk again more detailed about that in just a second. And the last piece here is secure remote access, right? So you may have internal applications, right? Internal SaaS, web-based applications that you are critical enough that you don't want to put them in your DMZ, but maybe they are also useful enough to your users that even when those users are remote, you want to give them access. And we have a gateway product that allows you to do that. It's basically a reverse proxy. It's part of EMS, and it allows you to advertise those internal web apps out through your My Apps portal for your users for remote use. And that's called Azure App Proxy. Now, here's sort of an overall view on what EMS in the security footprint does, right? So at the top, we have Azure Active Directory Premium. It's controlling all the identities and who has access to data. And underneath that, you have three different pieces that deal with, again, either allowing users in, giving them access to data, or detecting a potential threat. So if we start kind of on the bottom right corner, oops, I apologize. I thought I was in my pointer mode. If we start over here with Intune, this is the MDM. So this is our mobile device management product. We'll talk about this more deeply here in a minute, but again, the idea here is protect those mobile devices, and in our case, protect the mobile apps as well. You have Azure Rights Management here in the middle, and this is about protecting key data assets. And then advanced threat analytics, and we're going to dig into that in just a second as well. Also, something that's new, not part of EMS, is cloud app security. And that's a new way, again, of watching for shadow IT, seeing what SaaS apps your users are using on a day in, day out basis, so that as IT or security, you can get in front of that. Now, advanced threat analytics is a very interesting product and something that is a little bit outside the norm for EMS, because a lot of EMS is all about cloud services. Advanced threat analytics, however, is an on-premises tool. So you run this in your data center. And what advanced threat analytics does, it's a behavioral analytics engine, and it watches all the Active Directory logins throughout your organization. Right. So most of identity today, some 90%, is all based on AD. And so we're leveraging that to be able to tell what your users are doing. And we use those behavioral analytics to develop a heat map for each of your users to say, hey, users, this is what a typical user, this is what Chris, he's a sales resource, he's kind of going to these resources from these computers at these time of day. Typically, when we see him fall outside of that, all of a sudden he starts going out to financial assets. We start seeing him go hit up engineering assets. You know, maybe this is wrong. We can flag it. So we also can look for the known attack vectors, right? Past a hash, golden ticket. We know what all of these look like from an Active Directory standpoint, so we can immediately flag those. And all of these are presented back to security or to IT in a very easy to read format. It's kind of a social media feed. You can drill down and see what's going on. And from there you can say, oh, I see these different things that all corresponds back to this one user identity. Let's go change that password and get rid of this, potential hacker that's been in my environment for a long time. Or maybe it's a malicious user, right? Up to you to determine that at that point. But again, advanced threat analytics is an on-premises tool that just sits there and monitors Active Directory. Cloud app security, on the other hand, again, this is not part of EMS where ATA is, but cloud app security is watching those software as a service apps that your users are using. And the idea here is that, again, you may see that your users are starting to use a SaaS service out there, and usually it's a groundswell. A couple people here at the beginning start using it, they're pushing a little bit of data to it, and all of a sudden you start to see those numbers grow, and you want to get ahead of that from an IT or security perspective to either remind your users that that's not a valid place that they should be putting corporate data, or that you need to get ahead of it and make it a certified, if you will, IT asset for your company. And so that's what it's doing. So it's watching. So the idea really isn't to say, hey, Joe's been on Facebook too much, but I guess you could use it for that. Again, the idea really here is, hey, we've got somebody that's putting something in Dropbox today. Dropbox isn't one of our corporate standards. How do we block that? So once we do that, then we have this conditional access. And conditional access is where things really get interesting, because we can really do fine-grained management on where data is allowed to be presented back to your users, right? No matter where they are. But we need to get the next step in the key here taken care of, and that's managing the devices. And this is where Intune comes in. So that was on the slide earlier. Intune is the way we manage those mobile devices, but it's about more than just an MDM, because an MDM is kind of a check in the box nowadays, right? Can you put a pin in enforce encryption, push some policies to a device? All that's very easy to do. Many MDMs do it. But where it becomes even more critical is with the apps. So we want to control what we do with the apps. Again, this starts with the productivity apps, the Office suite, and we want to be able to control where data goes from app to app. So if we can manage the device and we can manage the Office apps, and then there's some other third-party apps that are starting to come to this framework, we can create an enterprise network, if you will, on that user's mobile device that says data can go from here to here, but not anywhere else. So let me give you an example. a user gets a spreadsheet sent to them. It's got corporate data in it, right? It came through the corporate email. They bring it up in Excel, they copy some cells off, and they go try to paste it in the Twitter app. We'll block that operation from happening because the Twitter app is not part of this enterprise fabric. But if they go to try to put that data into Word or PowerPoint or Excel or back in Outlook or something like that, will allow that to happen, right? And then again, there are some other third-party apps that are starting to come to the framework that allow you to do it. Same thing, once that new document is created with enterprise data, we're going to dictate where it can be saved to, right? So if they try to go save it to their OneDrive personal account, we'll block that. OneDrive for business will allow that to happen. Box actually is part of our fabric now, so if you turn Box on, you can save it to Box. So it's data level protection and not just, oh, it's on my device, they can do whatever they want with it. So we really have some fine-grained controls. And this is where Intune is, again, differentiated from the other MDM pieces that are out there. Now, when we talk about conditional access, that's the second differentiator. So a lot of other MDMs have some sort of conditional access. But the way they have to implement conditional access is by routing all that traffic back through your corporate data center through an appliance and then back up into Azure or Office 365 or wherever you have your data. This is not how we see access management being done, right? We don't want a single point of failure there. We want to be able to have an application talk directly to a cloud service and allow that access management to happen based on the device, whether the device is compliant, whether the user is who they say they are, and all that. We also want our applications to be multi-identity aware, and all the Office applications are. So when you have an Office application, it understands that there's personal data and that there's business data, and it knows what to do when when you're opening up one of those pieces of information. The other part of it is with the mobile apps themselves, right? We want to be able to do what we call MAM, mobile application management, without the MDM, right? A lot of companies, they don't want to control what's on a user's device, right? They don't want to go control that device, but they do want to be able to control what's happening with the data on the device. And this is where, again, that MAM, mobile application management technology that's part of Intune comes in, because now we can actually roll that to a device without MDM. We can still control, like I just described, where data goes from application to application. We can force file and data encryption on the corporate data and then wipe it when need be. And really the only checks on the device that we need to do are, is it rooted or jailbroken? Because if that happens, all bets are off, right? You don't want to allow anything to happen. So that's the only test that we do. And I mentioned the other apps that we're starting to push. Now, I've been teasing for a while about conditional access, and this is a first look, right? So we've got some conditional access today. With Intune, we can say whether a device is compliant, and if it's not compliant, we can block access to back-end Office 365 resources. But this is about to grow up. So here within the next couple of months, here in the summertime, we're going to roll some finely grained conditional access through Azure Active Directory Premium, again, part of EMS, that's going to allow you to look at all these different user attributes, device attributes, application pieces, and some other pieces to decide what to do with access to back-end cloud or on-premises resources. We can allow it, we can enforce multi-factor, or we can outright block. So let's take a couple of examples real quick. I'm a validated user, so I check all the user attribute boxes, but I'm on a managed device that's not compliant, or maybe I'm on an application that's not compliant. I can choose on a per application and per type device whether to allow, enforce, or MFA or block that application. So again, pretty straightforward. The scenario I just laid out, non-compliant device, I just want to block that, right? Something's wrong with the device. I'm not happy with it. I'm going to block access. But maybe I've got a user that's, went to mom's house for a holiday, jumped on her PC and just wants web access. They claim they are who they say they are. I hit them with MFA to prove that they are, and the device looks okay. I'll allow that in. But maybe I'll block access to saving data to that device because it's not managed. These are all conditional access technologies that are coming very, very soon. They're actually in preview today. So I talked about the mobile application management, so I'm going to kind of skip over this slide except to reinforce that this is where you've got that multi-aware identity policy. People, especially on their iPads and such, really like this because, how many people, your kids actually know your PIN, right? Because you allow them to play Angry Birds or whatever on your tablet. But this way, when your kid starts just randomly pushing and saying, hey, that's a pretty logo, let's click on Word or let's click on Outlook and see what happens, they're actually going to get presented with a PIN. A secondary PIN that's an application-specific PIN to get into that data so that you can actually block that. So if you don't want to have a PIN on your device or you want to allow your device PIN to be known by your kids so they can get into those game apps or whatever, you can do so but still protect your personal or corporate data. And this is the scenario about blocking copy, paste, and saving that I already discussed. Now, we're watching, again, where all this collaboration is happening, and we can use that cloud learning, right, that machine learning to figure out what is and isn't being done correctly. So we can start blocking that access. We can watch where the storage is going. We can watch and log all these different pieces. We can have the ability to kill documents remotely. So this is where rights management comes in. So we're moving kind of out of the application layer and into the data layer, right? But hey, we can have a document that's rights protected, and I can give it out into the wild, but say it's only good for 30 days or only good for 2 weeks, or maybe just remotely revoke access even that I've given because it looks like it's gotten out into the wild. And this is RMS. So this is Azure RMS. It's the data level protection. We're going to encrypt the individual pieces of data, be it a spreadsheet or a Word document or any kind of file format out there. Pretty much, we can wrap it in again, an encryption in a rights management wrapper. That way, only those users that you've explicitly given access to have access to that data. Great way to share critical data with your employees. Another great way of sharing with corporate folks, right? People outside of your organization that you still have to share data with. You can do so on a very defined basis. We do this at Microsoft. We'll share out documents that need to be protected, and we'll do it with rights management. We'll time bomb it for 30 days. We'll watermark it with the user's email address so that you can always see who it was in case data leaked. And it allows you to have that timeline view so you can see who's been accessing that data and whether they've been successful or not. Run Windows apps for anywhere. We've been talking about web apps, SaaS apps, right? But obviously there's a lot of Windows apps out there. Again, not part of EMS, but sort of a corollary piece is Azure Remote Access. So being able to run those Windows applications in the Microsoft cloud, let us deal with the scaling and scaling up, scaling down. You don't have to rewrite your apps. It just gives your users access no matter where they are with a client that's freely downloadable, again, with all the security policies in play. All right, so the last piece is the comprehensive solution, right? So when I've talked about a lot of different pieces here, and you may say, hey, we've looked at an MDM, or we've looked at some rights management solution, or we've looked at some identity solution even. But nobody except Microsoft has a comprehensive solution. And so we've done this for a couple of different reasons. Number one, we feel you have to, right? All this stuff has to be integrated. When we look at we've had some studies that have been done, right? 25% of all software spending is expected to be done in the mobility space. So that means creating, presenting, and managing mobile apps and devices by 2017. So this is moving really, really fast. So it's got to be a cross-platform, flexible architecture. We do that. We cover, obviously, Android and iOS, Windows Phone as well. We want to make it easy to maintain. We want to push as much self-service to the user as we can. At the end of the day, we want to save you money. We built it as a cloud service so that it's always up to date. Again, we talked about working with your on-premises and existing investments today. And it needs to be simple to set up and connect. If you've ever talked to anybody about a different IDP, there's all this FUD going out there, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? About, oh, hey, the Microsoft stack really hard to set up. It's not. All you need to know is Azure AD Connect. It'll walk you through the process of getting identities up into the cloud, and folks like New Signature are great at helping people set that up as well. So it's really, really easy to use. And at the end of the day, it's going to help save you money. When we look out at the users out there, if you have zero Microsoft footprint today, right, no Cal suites with us today, EMS can be around $8.75 per user per month for all the different things I talked about. But if you go price a identity management solution, you go price an MDM, you go price data protection and other things, it can be $18, $20, $30 per user per month. So we're really saving you. And if you've got a Cal suite today, this number, this $8.75, I've seen as low as $4 per user per month, which for the entire suite is way less than what you're already paying or might be looking at for just an MDM. And again, it's a comprehensive solution. So we're looking to save everybody money and make it easier for you to use, make it easier for you to manage as well. That's the big one, right? As you talk about all these individual pieces, it comes down to management. So here are a quick overview of all the things we talked about, right? The parts that are in Enterprise Mobility Suite. Azure Active Directory is the linchpin. That's all the identity, multi-factor authentication, single sign-on. It also includes licenses for Forefront Identity Manager, now called Microsoft Identity Manager, to keep all your on-premises identity components in sync, be able to do self-service password reset both in the cloud and on-premises. Advanced threat analytics, again, for watching all that behavior, looking for suspicious behavior using machine learning. Intune for doing mobile device management and mobile application management. And then Azure Rights Management Service for doing the encryption of the individual data points. Now, we also touched on Cloud App Security. Again, not part of EMS, but part of the overall enterprise mobility solution set at Microsoft. So again, why Microsoft? We talked about the cost and that sort of thing. An important piece here is that it integrates extremely well and actually extends the security of both Office 365 and Windows. But if you're not using Office 365, maybe you're a Google Apps customer or something, we're still doing all that single sign-on. We're still going to be able to do rich conditional access in other pieces as well. So while we don't think anybody comes close to being able to offer you the productivity that you get with Office 365, and EMS brings to the table even more security, again, we can work with even other platforms. And I'll just leave this slide for you for later. You can get it when you download the deck, but again, it shows that enhancement of Office 365 that EMS gives you, and Windows 10 the same way. The last thing I'll point out real quick is this is really neat. So Windows 10 has a lot of security pieces in it. So it's really hard to have a discussion about security without talking about all the benefits of Windows 10. The one thing I want to point out, I talked about that MAM capability in Intune for mobile devices. We have that same thing coming for Windows 10 called Enterprise Data Protection. So even with a user's personal Windows 10 device with Enterprise Data Protection on there, you can still securely manage what that user is able to do with enterprise data. And so that's why all these pieces are tied in together, why it's critical to talk about all the pieces at one time. So that's a really quick look at the Enterprise Mobility Suite. Apologize for talking fast. I know there's probably questions, and we're happy to take those either online or now or afterwards. But I thank you for your time today, and I'll turn it over to Bill.
Great. Thank you, Chris. It was a great overview of the mobile device management and protecting your data. So as Chris said, I'm Bill Martin. I'm one of our solutions architects with New Signature. And I'd just like to take a few more minutes to kind of talk a couple of examples of some of the customers that we've used and deployed EMS solution out to. So for example, the healthcare organization, a large healthcare organization in the Southeast, they really took advantage of the EMS suite and configured and deployed many of the different pieces of it. They were very big on the mobile device management, and they were replacing an existing solution they had. But one of the key pieces of that was being able to support across multiple platforms, and then the mobile application management of being able to control the data as to where the users could copy that data from and to the different applications, as well as very importantly where they could store that data, and ensuring that when we did a corporate wipe on that device, that corporate data was safe and protected and the user was no longer allowed access to it. We also deployed the RMS solution. We tied that in with the Office 365 DLP, so not only were they able to detect looking for patterns in email, but allowing users the ability of encrypting data and assigning permission to attachments that they had that they were developing, that they were emailing out to their partners and their customers. We also tied into the RMS, we added that into their file servers and put permissions on specific shares and folders that they were out. We implemented a multi-factor authenticating solution with their They had some concerns of being able to prove their users where they were. They also had some concerns about how do they allow it to work with the devices that maybe were in a basement and had no cell signal, but they did have Wi-Fi signal, so we were able to get that functional for them as well. They did have a very large volume of self-password reset. We actually, for this customer, we tied in not only the capabilities that are provided from the EMS suite, but we also provided capabilities of ADFS, and we were able to change the GINA or the logon screen, so they were able to, if they were in-house, they were able to actually click on that from their PC and change their password. And we simplified access to their SaaS applications by providing a single sign-on. They were using many of the common applications that were out there, and they even had some custom applications that we were able to tie into that as well. Another example is a tax authority that we had. They started off, they said, okay, what we really want just right out of the gate is we have a VPN solution and we're using AD to authenticate for our VPN, but we realize that that's not really secure enough. So they wanted multi-factor authentication on their VPN solution. So we brought the MFA, which is already set up and works with all your cloud applications quite well. We brought that on premise, and we applied that to first their VPN solution and enabled multi-factor for people when they were accessing coming in. And then we expanded that out to applications that they were publishing internally as well, that we added MFA to those applications as well. One of the other, from that we enabled additional pieces, the mobile device management. They did not have any mobile device management solutions, so they were quite happy to start to be able to control the data that was on there and be able to identify who was accessing what, controlling who was accessing what, as well as being able to wipe those devices. Another key piece, and Chris didn't really mention this too much on the MDM, but Intune has the capabilities of creating certificate profiles and Wi-Fi profiles. And this particular customer used certificates to access their email solution. So we were able to publish certificate profiles to users and allow the users access to their email solution, but only users that we wanted to allow access. And so that was another way of controlling who and what can access your internal resources besides using conditional access. And another customer that we had provided for was a large retail customer. And one of the big things that they wanted to do was be able to allow their users the capabilities of managing their own groups. You know, they had assigned that permission to certain people and gave them the ability to say, okay, how can, you know, who can be access to this group? And then also from taking that and tying that into the single sign-on and saying, okay, based on group provisioning, you know, who has access to what applications, and once again tying back to that My Apps portal that Chris had talked about. And as you can see here, we also implemented several of the other features, MDM, RMS. They were actually wanted to protect data on SharePoint sites on their own, SharePoint Online that they have. We wanted to protect the data that was out there, so we implemented RMS on that, as well as multi-factor and self-service password reset. So that said, let me tell you a little about New Signature. One of the key things, you know, we are a consulting firm, and you know, our goal in our business is all about customer service, and we want to consistently make sure that we provide great service, a great customer experience on any and every project that we do. You know, there's always going to be little bumps in any given project, but our focus is making sure that, you know, in our experiences, okay, when we run into those bumps, either we've seen that before or we have a good methodology on how to address that and how to identify it and minimize those impacts to your business. And so we want to make sure that, you know, whatever project, whether it's an EMS solution, an Office 365 solution, a full identity or anything, we're able to provide a good customer experience for that. We want to be able to, well, we don't want to be able to, we do create full solutions. So we've, you know, I know that some of the competitors have go in and they'll talk about trying to sell, okay, well, let me sell you the EMS suite. Let me try to sell you Office 365. What really is what you need to do is really need to take a step back and not sell products and not to say, I just want to implement a product. But we need a solution to help transform your business and give your business that competitive edge and be able to respond to the day-to-day challenges you have from your competitors and your customers. And so we'll look at that whole, you know, where are your business challenges, where are your technical challenges, and from that we create a solution and deploy a solution in there. And that solution may be something just EMS, or maybe it's EMS and you know, deeper into identity and communications, or whatever the case may be. We want to create that whole solution. So how do we achieve this? You know, the first thing we start with is an assessment and planning. So we'll dig in deep with your organizations and discover, you know, what your environment looks like. What are you running today? You know, and as we said, or as I said earlier, what you want to do tomorrow. And so we plan and design that solution. Then we take that into the next step, moving that into a proof of concept, and then from the proof of concept to pilot to actually building it into production. From that point, we move into an operation phase, and we can also provide remote services to be able to maintain and monitor and update your solutions. So if you're, for example, you're trying to deliver patches to your desktop operating systems or your, you know, server operating systems, we can manage your SCCM environment and be able to control that and update that and automatically take care of those day-to-day operations. And that goes much beyond just an SCCM. That's pretty much your whole environment. So there's three pillars of where our focus is: professional services, you know, and that's kind of what I talked about, designing solutions and going and creating the solutions to assess your business. Our managed services, you know, the technology management experience, being able to manage what technology you have out there, being able to manage the cloud experience or CMX experience that you have. So we have a full breadth of managed services that we provide, as well as cloud applications, whether that be not only helping to implement Azure and manage Azure, but also helping you to build those applications that are going to be able to be used by your users, whether they're sitting in your corporate office on a PC or a laptop, or maybe they're on a mobile device being able to, provide sitting out, such as one created for a car dealership where the dealers were able to sit down with a tablet as they walked around with their customers and be able to pull up information on any model of any car that they were selling. So we help to create those applications, manages those applications. We tie all that together by providing learning and application services. So, as I said, not only the mobile applications, but also, any, .NET or other applications that you have, as well as we are a certified Microsoft training center, so we can provide education either remotely or on-site at your environment. So that said, we're getting real close to our time, so if you have any questions, you can contact us at info@newsignature.com. You also, if there's any questions that you have right now, please go ahead and type them into the conversation and we'll address them from there. And I'd like to thank everybody for your time. Looks like we have a couple of questions being typed. Just give a minute for those to be entered.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Josh. So the question is, I mentioned the 2,600 supported apps. What if apps are not currently supported? So you can actually add your own apps to the platform, and so that's one way of doing it. You can add them directly yourself. The other way is by letting us know, right? So if there's a third-party solution that you would like to see directly supported by Microsoft, the Azure Active Directory team is actively looking for your input. So let us know. We're happy to reach out to that third-party solution and try and get it integrated directly right from the top. So, great question, Josh. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much for your question, and feel free to contact us if you think of something later or want to take this offline at info@newsignature.com. We're happy to help, and we'll give you a quick response. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is recorded, and you will receive a copy in roughly 2 days. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.